For the main
She
course,
used
the chef
sign language
recommends
at
the roasted
Christmas.
duck with
The
cranberry
Mafia boss's
glaze.
mother
That
chose
sounds
her as the
absolutely
wife of her
delicious.
Yeah,
only
I
son.
believe I'll have that as well.
In a small, cozy apartment on the edge of the city, Alina sat by the window, her fingers tracing patterns in the condensation. Outside, carolers sang softly, but their voices seemed distant, as if the music belonged to another world. Alina had always felt separate from the world, not because she wanted to be, but because the world had never truly heard her. She spoke through her hands, signing every thought and feeling with precise motions, letting the world watch without truly listening. Most people found it strange or awkward, but to Alina it was freedom. Tonight she wore a simple red sweater, the color of the season, and a scarf knitted by her grandmother. Her hair fell in soft waves, untouched by fancy styles. She liked simple things, the warm glow of a candle, the soft hum of Christmas music, the way snow could make even the harshest streets seem magical. She did not know that tonight her life was about to change forever. A soft knock on the door startled her. Alina turned, fingers pausing mid-sign. She wasn't expecting anyone. Slowly, she opened the door to see a tall woman wrapped in a long, dark coat. Her presence was commanding, her posture perfect, as if she belonged to a different world altogether. There was an air of authority about her, a weight that made the room feel smaller. "Good evening, Alina," the woman said, her voice smooth and deliberate. "May I come in?" Alina blinked. She did not recognize her, yet there was something familiar in the way the woman's eyes searched hers. Hesitantly, she stepped aside. "I am Donatella D'Angelo," the woman introduced herself. "Perhaps you have heard of my family." Alina's hands froze. D'Angelo. She had heard whispers of the name before, stories of power, fear, and wealth. The D'Angelo family was not ordinary. It was a name that could shape the city and change the lives of anyone who crossed it. I have heard," Alina signed quickly, her fingers moving faster than usual. She felt her heart pounding. Donatella's lips curved slightly in a knowing smile. She did not seem offended by Alina's use of sign language. In fact, she seemed intrigued. "You are different," Donatella said, her voice softening. "There is strength in you that cannot be taught, and I am here because my son, my only son, must meet someone who is worthy of him." Alina's stomach twisted. She had never imagined being noticed by someone like Donatella D'Angelo, let alone being considered for her son. Her mind raced with questions, but she remained silent, letting her eyes speak. Donatella studied her carefully. "Alessandro is complicated," she continued. "He has grown up in a world of power, expectations, and danger. Many have tried to enter it and most have failed. But you," she paused, letting the word linger, "you are different." Alina felt a strange mixture of fear and curiosity. She knew that stepping into this world could mean danger, but something in Donatella's gaze made her think that perhaps there was also opportunity, an opportunity to be seen, truly seen, in a way the world rarely allowed. The next evening, Alina found herself standing in the grand hall of the D'Angelo mansion. The building was enormous, with high ceilings, glittering chandeliers, and portraits of stern ancestors lining the walls. Every step she took echoed, and she felt both awe and intimidation. Alessandro D'Angelo entered the room quietly, his presence commanding without effort. He was tall, his dark hair perfectly styled, his eyes sharp and assessing. When he noticed Alina, his gaze lingered, curious and cautious. "You are Alina," he said finally, his voice deep and calm. "My mother spoke of you." Alina signed quickly, introducing herself. Alessandro watched, his brow furrowed slightly. There was something mesmerizing in the way her hands moved, the way her expressions changed with each motion. It was as if her entire soul was visible in her gestures. "I see," he said, a hint of a smile tugging at his lips. "Not many can speak to me like that." Alina's heart skipped. She realized he understood her in ways most people never could. And yet, there was caution in his eyes. She could sense the walls he had built around himself, the burdens of expectations, power, and fear. Donatella observed from the side, her expression unreadable. "He will test you," she said quietly. "Not with words, but with life itself. And you must decide if you are willing to step forward, knowing everything that comes with him." For days, Alina walked through the mansion, learning the rhythms of the D'Angelo world. She met the household staff, all polite yet distant, and witnessed subtle gestures of loyalty and fear. She realized that in this world, appearances could be deceiving, and silence could speak louder than words. Alessandro, meanwhile, watched her from a distance. He had never encountered anyone who challenged him without words, who could speak through silence and still leave him unsettled. He found himself drawn to her quiet strength, the way she observed the world without judgment, and the courage it took to navigate spaces where she was clearly an outsider. One evening, as snow fell gently outside the mansion's tall windows, Alessandro approached Alina while she sat by the fireplace, fingers moving slowly in the dance of sign language. "Do you like it here?" he asked, though his voice seemed to falter under the weight of the question. Alina paused, then signed, "It is different. I am not sure I belong." Alessandro's lips pressed together. He understood, though she did not say it aloud. He knew the feeling of being trapped in a world that demanded perfection, loyalty, and strength. And yet, he felt something fragile and precious in her presence, a reminder of what life could be outside power and fear. Days passed, and the tension between them grew. They spoke without words, exchanged glances that held questions, confessions, and unspoken longing. Every shared moment felt charged, as if the air itself carried secrets too dangerous to voice. Then came the evening that would change everything. Donatella summoned Alina to her private study, the room lit with the golden glow of candles and the soft scent of pine from the Christmas tree in the corner. "Alina," Donatella began, her eyes fixed on hers, "my son must marry someone who understands him, who can walk with him in this world and keep him grounded. I have chosen you." Alina's heart froze. She knew what this meant. She was being offered a place in a world that could swallow her whole. And yet, there was something in Donatella's gaze that made her consider stepping forward to take the risk. I do not know if I can," Alina signed, her fingers trembling. Donatella nodded slowly. "It is not an easy choice, but you must know Alessandro will be complicated. He carries shadows from the past, responsibilities and dangers you cannot imagine, but he is also capable of love if someone shows him the way." Alina swallowed hard, her mind a whirlwind of fear and curiosity. She realized that life would never be simple if she chose this path, but the thought of walking away, of never knowing the connection she felt with Alessandro, was unbearable. That night, Alina stood by the window of her temporary room in the mansion, watching the snow fall silently. She thought of Alessandro, of Donatella's words, of the life she could have. Her fingers moved slowly, unconsciously signing to the empty room. "What am I doing?" But deep down, she knew she could not ignore the pull she felt. The silent bond forming between her and Alessandro was more powerful than fear, more powerful than caution. And though she did not yet understand the full weight of the world she was stepping into, she felt ready to face it. As the clock struck midnight, the snow outside glittered like 1,000 tiny stars. Alina turned toward the door, ready to face whatever came next, unaware that her decision had already set in motion events that would change her life forever. Somewhere in the mansion, Alessandro watched her from the shadows. He felt an unfamiliar sensation stir in his chest, a mixture of longing, fear, and hope. And for the first time in many years, he wondered if someone could truly see him, without fear, without judgment, without pretense. And in that quiet, snow-filled night, two lives, so different yet destined to collide, waited for the dawn, for the choice that could either bind them together or tear them apart. Snow continued to fall outside the grand D'Angelo mansion, blanketing the city in soft white. Inside, the mansion seemed warm and alive, though beneath its golden lights and laughter lingered a quiet tension. Alina had spent several days in the house now, walking its halls with cautious curiosity, and she could feel the invisible walls of power pressing in around her. Alessandro had begun to notice her everywhere, in the library where she studied old books with careful fingers, in the garden where she watched the snow drift silently onto the hedges, even in the kitchen where she helped the staff prepare holiday treats. Her presence was subtle but impossible to ignore. He observed her with a mixture of fascination and wariness. Unlike the women he had met before, Alina did not seek attention or try to impress. She moved with quiet confidence, her eyes always alert, her hands speaking a language Alessandro could only partially understand but deeply respect. One evening, while the mansion was quiet and most of the staff had gone home, Alessandro found Alina sitting alone in the grand hall. A fire crackled in the marble fireplace, casting warm orange light on her face. She was signing something he could not fully read, but the movements were graceful, almost hypnotic. He stepped closer, his voice careful. "You seem calm, even in all this." Alina paused and turned to him, her hands stilling. She signed slowly. "I try to understand this world. It is not always easy." Alessandro nodded. "No, it is not," he said. "But you seem to belong in it in some way." She smiled faintly, and he noticed a sadness beneath it. It was not the sadness of weakness, but the sadness of someone who had seen too much, yet still held on to hope. The days that followed were filled with small, quiet moments that built a bridge between them. They shared meals at the long dining table, spoke in gestures and glances, and sometimes simply sat together in the library, letting silence pass comfortably between them. Alessandro began to feel a connection with Alina unlike anything he had ever experienced, a connection that was more than curiosity or attraction. It was trust, fragile but real. Yet danger was never far away in the D'Angelo world. One evening, as Alina walked through the mansion's garden, she noticed shadows moving near the perimeter walls. She could feel the presence of people who did not belong, their intentions unclear but dangerous. She hurried back inside, her heart pounding, and told Alessandro. He frowned, his hand brushing hers in silent acknowledgement. "You saw them too," he said, his voice low. "They have been watching us." Alina nodded, signing quickly. "Who are they? Why do they watch?" "They are rivals," Alessandro explained. "Enemies of the family. They want to weaken us to take what we have." His eyes darkened. "And they will not hesitate to hurt anyone in their path." The weight of his world pressed on Alina. She had stepped into something far bigger than she had imagined, a world of power, loyalty, and danger. And yet, despite her fear, she felt a strange courage. She would not turn away from him, not now, when he had already become so important to her. Winter nights in the mansion grew longer, and Alessandro and Alina found themselves spending more time together. They walked through the snow-covered gardens, their breaths forming small clouds in the cold air. Sometimes they would stand in silence, letting the falling snow cover the distance between them. One night, as snowflakes danced around the fountains in the garden, Alessandro finally spoke what he had been holding inside for days. "Alina, I am not easy to be with," he said, his voice rough with honesty. "My life is full of shadows. People expect things from me. I am not the man most women dream of." Alina looked at him, her fingers moving in a slow, deliberate sign. "I do not want easy. I want real." His breath caught. No one had ever said that to him. In a world full of ambition, fear, and deception, Alina's words felt like sunlight breaking through ice. He wanted to say more, to tell her all the truths he had hidden for years, but he stopped, unsure if she could bear it. Days later, Alina discovered a secret in the mansion, a room hidden behind a large bookshelf in the library. Inside, she found old letters, portraits, and a small box filled with objects that spoke of a curse that had haunted the D'Angelo family for generations. The curse was not just superstition. It was a shadow that seemed to follow Alessandro, feeding on fear, pride, and betrayal. Alina knew that if the curse was real, it could put both of them in danger. She felt the weight of this knowledge, the responsibility pressing down on her. And yet she could not turn away. She had seen the man Alessandro could be, beyond fear and shadows, and she wanted to help him reach it. When she shared her discovery with Alessandro, he was silent for a long time. Then he nodded slowly. "You understand more than I thought," he said. This family, this curse, it has shaped everything about me. And yet maybe you can help me break it." Alina felt a mixture of hope and fear. The task seemed impossible, yet she could see a path, however small, toward freedom and change. And for the first time she felt truly needed, truly seen, not just for what she could do, but for who she was. As the days passed, the connection between them deepened. Alessandro began to open up in small ways, sharing stories of his childhood, of expectations, of the loneliness that came with his power. Alina listened without judgment, her hands moving slowly in their silent conversation. She offered comfort, understanding, and sometimes just her presence. One evening, as the mansion prepared for a small Christmas gathering, Alina found herself standing in the grand hall, watching the family and staff move about with polite cheer. She felt out of place and overwhelmed. Alessandro approached her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You do not have to smile if you do not feel like it," he said gently. "You are allowed to be yourself here." Alina's fingers moved quickly in response. "Thank you. That means more than you know." For a moment, the world outside seemed to fade. The danger, the expectations, the curses, they all seemed distant in that small connection, but reality was never far behind. Late that night, while Alina was alone in her room, she noticed a shadow moving across the hall. Someone had entered the mansion without permission. Her heart raced, but she stayed calm, watching, waiting. She realized that the danger was closer than they had imagined. Alessandro found her in the hall, alert and tense. "You saw them," he said. "They are testing us, seeing how we respond." Alina nodded, signing, "I am not afraid." "You should be," he said softly, "but I admire you for facing it anyway." That night they sat together by the fireplace, the snow falling softly outside. Words were unnecessary. The silence between them was full of meaning, trust, fear, understanding, and the beginnings of something deeper. They both knew that their bond was growing stronger, even as the world around them grew more dangerous. Alina realized that her life had changed completely in just a few days. She was no longer the quiet woman who stayed at the edge of the city, unnoticed and alone. She was now part of a world full of power, secrets, and shadows. And at the center of it all was Alessandro, a man both beautiful and terrifying, whose life was as complicated as the snow-covered streets outside. And Alessandro realized that Alina was unlike anyone he had ever met. She did not fear the world around her. She faced it with courage, insight, and a quiet strength that drew him closer, even as the dangers of his life threatened to push them apart. The snow continued to fall, covering the mansion in a soft white blanket. The lights glowed warmly, but outside, the world was cold and unpredictable. Both of them knew that the path ahead would be difficult, filled with challenges they could not yet imagine. But for the first time, they also knew that they did not have to face it alone. As the clock neared midnight, a sudden noise shattered the quiet, an urgent knock at the mansion's door, followed by a shadow moving quickly across the entrance hall. Both Alina and Alessandro tensed, realizing that their world of quiet moments and growing trust was about to collide with danger far closer than they had anticipated. Alina's fingers moved quickly, signing a warning: "Someone is here. Be careful." Alessandro's eyes met hers, and in that instant no words were needed. Together, they moved toward the door, ready to face whatever had come to challenge them, and aware that nothing in their lives would ever be the same again. The snow continued to fall outside, silent and beautiful, as inside the mansion, two hearts prepared to meet the storm that was coming. The snow had stopped, leaving the city streets sparkling under a pale winter sun. But inside the D'Angelo mansion, the air was heavy with tension. Alina could feel it in every corner, the quiet hum of whispered conversations, the subtle glances of the staff, the unspoken weight that clung to every hallway. She had begun to understand that the D'Angelo family was not just powerful, it was bound by rules, secrets, and shadows that demanded careful navigation. Alessandro had been distant over the past few days. Alina noticed it immediately, a tension in his shoulders, a shadow in his eyes that had not been there before. She had learned to read him, not just through his gestures, but through the way he moved, the way he breathed, the way silence carried meaning. "Alina," he said one evening, his voice low and deliberate as they stood in the library, "there is something you need to know about my family, about me." Alina's fingers moved slowly. "I am ready." Alessandro hesitated, staring into the fire. "Our family, it carries a curse," he began. "It is not something simple or harmless. It has followed us for generations, feeding on fear, pride, betrayal, and loneliness. It has shaped everything about me, everything I have become." Alina's heart tightened. She had suspected as much, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real. She signed carefully, "Tell me everything. I can face it with you." Alessandro's gaze met hers, a mixture of relief and vulnerability. "Not everyone can face it," he said. "Most people leave. They fear what they cannot understand, but you see more than others, and perhaps you can help me break it." For a moment, silence filled the room, heavy and meaningful. Alina felt the weight of the task before her. To love Alessandro meant to face the shadows of his family, to confront danger, and to hold her own courage tightly in her hands. Yet, she felt a strange certainty. She could not turn away. Days turned into nights filled with careful observation and subtle lessons. Alina learned to navigate the mansion's hidden passages, the secret conversations, and the unspoken rules. She watched Alessandro, noticing the tension in his movements, the way he sometimes froze when confronted by reminders of the curse or his family's enemies. One evening, as a storm brewed outside, Alina followed him to a private room deep within the mansion. It was small, lined with ancient books, old photographs, and relics of the D'Angelo ancestors. Alessandro moved to a large portrait on the wall, a man with piercing eyes and a proud, unyielding expression. "This is my father," Alessandro said softly. He left a legacy I can never escape. The curse, it is his doing as much as ours. It binds us to this family, to the power we hold, but also to pain." Alina stepped closer, her hands moving carefully. "You are not alone," she signed. Alessandro's eyes softened. "I have always carried it alone," he admitted. "But with you, I feel like I can fight it, or at least face it." Their bond deepened with each shared secret, each small gesture of understanding. Alina realized that Alessandro's strength was not just in his power or wealth. It was in his ability to endure, to survive, and to protect. Yet she also saw the burden he carried, the loneliness that no one could touch but her. But danger was never far. That night a messenger arrived at the mansion, a man from a rival family, his eyes sharp and calculating. Alessandro intercepted him before Alina could see and returned with a warning. "They are growing impatient," Alessandro said, his voice tense. "They sense weakness. And they will try to strike when we least expect it." Alina felt a shiver run through her. She had expected challenges, but the reality of Alessandro's world was more dangerous than she had imagined. She signed, "We will face it together." Alessandro studied her hands for a long moment, as if trying to memorize every movement. "You are braver than most," he said quietly, "and I am grateful for that." As the storm raged outside, Alessandro invited Alina into the family's secret archives, a hidden room beneath the mansion, filled with manuscripts, letters, and relics. Here, the true history of the curse was written, a story of pride, betrayal, and sorrow that had haunted the D'Angelo family for generations. Alina read the letters carefully, tracing the words with her fingers. Each document told a tale of ambition, misfortune, and a shadow that grew stronger with each generation. She realized that the curse was not simply supernatural, it was born of human mistakes, of unchecked power and fear. Alessandro watched her quietly. "Most people would be frightened by this," he said, "but you seek to understand, not to run." Elena signed, "Understanding is the first step to change." For the first time, Alessandro smiled fully, a rare warmth in his eyes. He realized that Elena's courage and insight were more than he had ever found in anyone else. She did not judge him. She did not fear him. She simply offered understanding and partnership. The bond between them grew stronger, but so did the danger. One night, while the mansion slept under the storm's fury, Elena noticed a shadow moving outside the windows. It was not a human shadow. It was darker, unnatural, almost whispering with menace. Her heart raced, but she stayed calm, knowing Alessandro would trust her instincts. She signed quickly, "Something is coming, be ready." Alessandro nodded, his hand brushing hers. "I trust you," he said. "We face it together." The shadow outside seemed to pause, as if aware of the unity forming inside the mansion. It was a warning, a reminder that the curse and the dangers of Alessandro's world were never far away. But for the first time, he felt that he was not alone in facing them. The following days were tense. Elena and Alessandro trained in secrecy, learning to anticipate threats, to understand the legacy of the curse, and to protect one another. Each moment together was charged with emotion, fear, longing, trust, and the quiet thrill of connection. One evening, while walking through the snow-covered gardens, Alessandro finally shared a memory he had never spoken aloud. "When I was a boy," he said softly, "I was told to never show weakness, to always be strong, always be in control. I learned to hide my fear, my pain, my loneliness. And yet, here with you, I feel free to be human." Elena's fingers moved slowly. "You are never alone again." His eyes glistened with unspoken emotion. "It is strange," he admitted, "to meet someone who sees me, truly sees me. And yet I am afraid, afraid of losing you, of failing myself." Elena reached out, brushing her hand against his. "We face it together. Whatever comes, we face it together." Days later, as winter's chill tightened around the city, Elena uncovered another secret, an old journal written by one of Alessandro's ancestors. The pages spoke of a ritual, a way to weaken the curse if approached with courage and understanding. But it required trust, patience, and an unwavering bond between those who faced it together. She shared her discovery with Alessandro. "It is dangerous," she signed, "but it may be our only way." Alessandro considered it carefully. "I do not fear danger with you," he said. "I fear only losing you in the process." Their eyes met, and for a moment the mansion seemed to fade around them. In that silence, they both understood the depth of what they were building, not just love, but partnership, courage, and the willingness to face shadows together. Yet the world outside remained merciless. That night, a messenger arrived once again, carrying a warning from a rival family. They had learned of Elena's presence and saw her as leverage. Alessandro's expression darkened, but he did not panic. He knew that the strength they had found together was their only shield. Elena felt a surge of determination. She would not be a pawn. She would stand beside Alessandro, no matter the risk. She had learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. As the storm outside intensified, Alessandro and Elena stood together in the grand hall, watching the snow swirl through the tall windows. "We cannot ignore them," he said. "But we also cannot let fear control us." Elena signed slowly, "Then we fight together." In that moment the mansion felt alive with their shared resolve. The curse, the rival families, the dangers of power, they all seemed smaller when faced with their unity. But even as they embraced this fragile hope, the shadows outside grew darker, and the challenges ahead became more dangerous. They had taken the first steps toward change, but the road was long, and the flames beneath the ice were not yet extinguished. And somewhere in the quiet halls of the mansion, Donatella D'Angelo watched them both, her expression unreadable. She had chosen Alina, yes, but she also knew that the true test of courage, loyalty, and love was only just beginning. Alina and Alessandro had found each other amidst shadows and snow, but the world outside would not wait. Danger, secrets, and the weight of the past were closing in, and the choices they made in the coming days would determine not just their futures, but the legacy of the D'Angelo family itself. The winter storm had passed, leaving the city quiet and glimmering under a thin layer of frost. Inside the D'Angelo mansion, the air was heavy with anticipation. Alina stood by the tall windows, her fingers moving slowly as she signed to herself, "This is it. Everything changes tonight." Alessandro entered the room silently, his dark eyes meeting hers. There was no need for words. He understood the meaning behind her signs. Tonight, they would face the culmination of everything they had been preparing for: the curse, the rival factions, and the unspoken expectations of the D'Angelo family. "You are ready?" he asked quietly, his voice calm but tense. Alina nodded yes, together. The mansion was unusually quiet. Staff had been instructed to remain in their quarters, and the halls seemed empty except for the two of them. Alessandro led Alina to the hidden archives beneath the mansion, a room where the family's secrets, relics, and manuscripts were stored. The walls were lined with portraits of ancestors, their eyes seeming to follow them as they moved. "This is where it all begins," Alessandro said softly. "If we are to face the curse, we must understand its roots. Every generation it has thrived on fear, betrayal, and unchecked power. But tonight, we change that." Alina felt a shiver run through her. The task ahead was daunting, but she was no longer afraid. She had learned to trust herself, and she trusted Alessandro. "We can do this," she signed, her hands steady. Together, they examined the old manuscripts and relics. The curse was not merely a tale. It was a shadow, an invisible force that had twisted the family's history. It fed on anger, pride, and secrets. To break it, they would need courage, trust, and unity, a bond strong enough to withstand the weight of generations. As they prepared, a sudden noise echoed from the main hall, a warning that the rival faction had arrived. Alina's heart raced, but she did not panic. Alessandro's hand brushed hers, grounding her. "We face them together," he said. The doors to the archives burst open, and several men entered, their expressions sharp, their intentions clear. Alessandro moved in front of Alina protectively. He did not draw a weapon immediately. Instead, he used strategy and presence, guiding the intruders away from her while signaling for her to remain calm. Alina watched, her hands moving in precise signs, communicating silently with him. They had trained for this, not just physically but emotionally. Every gesture, every glance carried meaning. She realized then that their bond was their strength, stronger than any fear, more powerful than any shadow. The confrontation was tense but brief. Alessandro's calm authority, combined with Alina's insight, allowed them to outmaneuver the intruders without serious harm. The rival men retreated, leaving behind only the echo of their threat. When the hall was silent again, Alessandro turned to Alina, his expression intense. "This is only the beginning," he said. "The curse will not yield easily. It feeds on doubt, fear, and anger. We must confront it fully together." Alina nodded, "I am ready." Together, they performed the ritual described in the manuscripts. It was not a magical spell, as one might imagine in stories, but a symbolic act of courage and trust. They traced their family history, acknowledged the pain and mistakes of the past, and made vows to break the cycle of fear and control. Alina's hands moved gracefully, signing each promise, each vow. Alessandro mirrored her gestures, their connection creating a rhythm that seemed to pulse through the room. The portraits of ancestors, once silent observers, seemed almost alive, their eyes softening as if approving the courage of the two standing before them. Hours passed, and the mansion seemed to breathe with them. The shadow that had haunted the D'Angelo family began to lift, dissipating with every honest word, every act of trust, every shared understanding. Alessandro's shoulders, once heavy with the weight of generations, began to feel lighter. When the ritual was complete, they stood facing each other, hands intertwined, eyes locked. The storm outside had returned, snow swirling against the tall windows, but inside there was warmth, peace, and an unspoken promise. "You have changed me," Alessandro said quietly. "Not just tonight, but in every moment since you arrived. You have shown me that strength does not mean fearlessness, and power does not mean isolation." Alina smiled softly, her fingers moving slowly. "And you have shown me that love can exist even in the darkest shadows." For a long moment, they simply stood there, absorbing the significance of what they had accomplished. The curse was weakened, but more importantly, they had strengthened their bond, proving that trust, courage, and unity could overcome even the most persistent shadows. But the night was not yet over. Donatella D'Angelo appeared, her expression as composed and unreadable as ever. "You have done well," she said, her voice calm but powerful. "I chose Alina not just because of her courage, but because she has the heart to see my son as he truly is. And you, Alessandro, you have finally learned that power without love is meaningless." Alessandro bowed slightly, a rare gesture of respect to his mother. "Thank you," he said, "for guiding me and for trusting us to do this together." Donatella nodded. "The family legacy is no longer a chain that binds you. It is a path you can walk with strength and honesty. Remember this always." As she departed, Alina and Alessandro remained in the archive room, the quiet hum of the mansion surrounding them. The storm outside had softened, snowflakes drifting lazily against the windows, casting patterns of light and shadow across the walls. Alina signed, "We did it. The shadows are gone." Alessandro smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Not gone," he said softly. "But we face them together, and that makes all the difference." For the first time in his life, Alessandro felt free, not just from the curse, but from the fear and isolation that had haunted him. And Alina, who had once been a quiet observer of the world, now stood as his equal, his partner, and the person who had changed his life forever. As the night deepened, they walked together through the mansion, past the halls that had once seemed intimidating, past the portraits that had once seemed stern and distant. Now, everything felt different, lighter, warmer, filled with possibility. They reached the grand hall where the Christmas lights still glimmered softly. Alessandro turned to Alina, his eyes reflecting both gratitude and longing. "Alina, will you walk with me, not just tonight but in everything that comes?" Alina's fingers moved slowly, deliberately. "Yes, always." He took her hand in his, holding it gently but firmly. "Then we begin a new chapter," he said. "Not as a family bound by fear, not as people haunted by the past, but as partners, together." The snow outside glittered in the pale light of dawn, and the mansion seemed to hum with quiet celebration. It was a new beginning, one forged from courage, trust, and love, a love that did not need words to be understood. In that moment, Alina realized that she had found her place, not just in Alessandro's life, but in a world that had once seemed impossible to navigate. And Alessandro realized that he had found someone who could see him fully, who could face the shadows with him, and who would never turn away. They stood together in the quiet hall, hands intertwined, hearts beating in unison. The past had been heavy, the future uncertain, but they faced it not as individuals but as one. And then, as the first light of dawn filtered through the tall windows, Alina signed her final vow, not just a promise but a declaration of their shared journey. Together always. No fear, no shadows, only us. Alessandro's lips curved into a soft, genuine smile. "Always," he whispered. The mansion, once a place of secrets, power, and shadows, now felt alive with hope, courage, and the quiet triumph of love. The snow outside continued to fall, but inside, warmth and light had taken root. And as they walked forward, hand in hand, they knew that whatever challenges awaited, they would face them together, bound not by fear, but by trust, understanding, and the unbreakable strength of the heart. The silent snowfall continued, but inside the D'Angelo mansion, two hearts had found their voice, and it spoke louder than any legacy, curse, or shadow ever could.